All right. My name's Walt Simpson. I'm with New American Mortgage, a local full-service mortgage lender, and I'll get the little commercial break in first. I do everything in the mortgage arena that you think of. What I specialize in as far as this group's concerned is the reverse mortgage product that is insured by FHA, administered by HUD. As such, there are tons of protections built in for the seniors, but its purpose, its goal, and its development back in the mid and late 80s was to find a way to allow seniors to use the equity in the home they had built up over years to remain in that home without having to incur additional costs. I mean, if you sell a house to move into a new house, if you've either got a new payment or you've used it was like a catch-22. Well, they found a way to allow them to stay in the house by allowing them access to a portion of their equity, which is affected primarily by their age. You have to be 62 and older to do this. And the rates of the time, and that's the most variable thing in there. Although they've been very steady the last couple of years, the rate, of course, will affect how much they can access at any given time. Now, that being said, I did not want to sit here and do the nuts and bolts and the technical parts of a reverse mortgage because everybody's eyes roll up in their head, and that's not really what they want to know about anyway. What they want to know is how do you use it? How can it be used? So give me a second. I'm going to put on these glasses because I'm going to actually look at this. I've got a couple of scenarios here. There are many more. I chose these because one was a fairly straightforward one, and one had a couple of quirks in it that took some creativity to make it happen. But they both made dramatic impacts in the individual people's lives. Now, if I stumble in here a little bit, it's because I changed the names to protect the guilty, I guess. But I know them another way. So I'm looking at the name, and I'm going to be thinking something else. But the Carters, this is the one with the blue writing. This is a couple lives in the city. They actually contacted me by mail, which is the only time that I can recall that happening. Often it's a referral from someone that, like in this group, or a couple of attorneys in town I know, some financial people. But this one actually was a letter I received. It wasn't addressed specifically to me. It was addressed to our office, and they were looking for someone for reverse mortgages, so it found its way to my desk, and I thought that was unique. But they had contacted most of the 800 numbers. And they really wanted somebody local, somebody they could sit down with and look them in the eye, meet them, talk to them, have their kids get to know them, that kind of thing. And I find that is an important aspect a lot of times for a lot of the seniors. I've heard that more than once. But this got to me by mail, and it was a hard letter to read. This lady was just short of 80, was having to retire. She wanted to continue working and almost had to, but she had to retire. Her husband had been essentially disabled for years, so couldn't work. And her income loss was going to be substantial to their living expenses, which weren't extravagant, but they were still an impact. So her problem is that she was going to not be working, and Social Security and his disability, a little bit of other aid they had. And by the way, they had a daughter with 2 children living in a basement apartment that they had essentially built out themselves to accommodate them, not for the money, because there really wasn't any money coming in from that end. So they had extra expenses, extra costs, extra weight. And so when she contacted me, we sat down. Sweetest lady, but you could tell who ran the house. I mean, right away. I mean, everything was pretty much that. But she knew what she wanted to do, and what she wanted to do was free. She had heard about this, but didn't know a lot about it. So we sat down. This one was fairly straightforward. All that was going to matter, they were obviously eligible. They were both almost 80. The house was essentially free and clear. So they certainly were going to get some amount, because there were no liens or taxes to pay off. But how much and how she wanted to take it. But this was it. So this one isn't dramatic. There's not a lot of detail here. This was just one where someone needed this money to offset the loss of income, and she was losing her job within the month, and she really didn't want to have any overlap. So this was just a simple, straightforward, I've got the equity. I don't want to move. I have other people to take care of other than myself and my husband. And by the way, they had spent a lot of what liquidity they had on essentially both daughters over the years, helping them out in and out of various problems. As I don't know if you're a parent, you pretty much relate to that. Some of us more than others. So in her case, we freed up in excess of $100,000. Now, $100,000 to some people is not going to be a substantial amount of money compared to what their assets are. To this lady, it was everything. She was going to use it as she saw fit. She did pay off some bills with it, fairly substantial, but that freed up monthly outgo. It essentially replaced it. If she's paying $600 a month to credit cards or whatever it was, now she doesn't, so that $600 is still in her pocket. This one was uncomfortable for me to do only because she gave me credit for doing a miracle, which it wasn't. This was fairly easy to do. As long as the house appraised, there weren't any major repairs. This one was not. This was pretty vanilla. She saw it as a miracle, which is interesting, and it's uncomfortable when someone keeps telling you how great a job you're doing. You know, well, this is easy. I really want to show you one of my tough ones. So, but this made a big difference in their lives. The reason I want to show this one is because it's about vanilla. You know, this one is it's anybody can see the situation. I've got a lady who doesn't want to move. She has no other access to money. This is it. This is all they had. What do? Well, if you don't know about this, you can't even say, why don't you talk to? This might be an idea for you. And that's really all I look for, is for someone to call me with a question or a situation and say, would this work here? Now, whether they'll do it or not, whether it'll fit, whether or not there's enough value, whether or not they're eligible due to age, whether or not there's weird ownership issues, those aren't the questions that need to be asked in this room. Is this an alternative possibly that they need to know about? And from there, they can make a decision on whether it's appropriate or maybe the only thing they can do. This became, other than selling a house, which really wouldn't have accomplished anything, they had to live someplace. This was it. They had no other access. The other side has got a little twist in it. That's the forests. That one came to me actually from this group. She's not here today. It was Margie Swanson. She had gotten a phone call from Miss Forrest, who was in financial straits. Really not a Margie Swanson client. There really wasn't an asset, anything to work with. But Margie knows me and knows enough about this to know that, wait a minute, there might be something in a reverse mortgage here. Their situation is that she and her husband lived in a home in town with their recently divorced daughter. The ex-husband was not atypically not living up to the agreements of helping with the continued house payments. They had been putting money in and out of the house for years, trying to, improve it, payments, whatever was needed. So they were down quite a bit of money in that regard. But it got to the point where the house was at risk. They were about ready to lose it. So I get this phone call, and I can tell in the first 2 minutes that she's beyond my help at this stage. Meaning, a reverse might be usable, but she had other issues coming at her faster than a freight train that I couldn't stop, and that was the losing of the house. So I referred her to a local real estate attorney who also closes reverses, understands reverses, does the real estate, does bankruptcy. In other words, he's a general practitioner that I knew there were a lot of issues here, but I couldn't identify them all. And I said, look, you're going to get run over before we can do anything. Call him up. Let me know you've called him. I'll then follow up and tell him, get some information from him, and we'll see what we can do. In the meantime, the research I did was that she didn't own the house. She lived in it with her husband, but it was her daughter's house and the ex-husband's house, and that was a real twist. That to me was going to be the biggest, if we could make it work, the biggest issue. Was he going to be cooperative? Well, the attorney had some conversations, and I guess he saw it was his best interest to be cooperative. But the idea was, can they somehow make it their home and do the reverse to save the house? Now, it was a daughter's house, but mom and dad had put a lot of money and time in it, so they did have equity of a sort. Yes, we could. As it turns out, since they'd lived in it so long as their primary home, they could transfer the property to mom and dad. Of course, the debt's still there. There was still a debt on the house, but that was the daughter's. But the lender doesn't care. They still have the lien on the property. At that point, they could do a reverse, pay off the lien, no house payments anymore. So there's that much money back in their pockets. We were able to free up enough money to pay mom the equity, the money she'd put in the last 5 years, and some additional cash to be available as they needed it. So they went from 3 people at least losing a home, finding some place to live with no money to do it, to being in a home with no payments and extra money to do something to it. So this again, a miracle to them. I mean, they came, but the first thing I want to point out is that I realized, and it's what we all deal with in this room, it's why we're in this group, is that I realized that they had issues I couldn't fix, but if they could get fixed or slowed down, I could step in. And that's why I refer to an attorney to slow things down. And then I went and did some research on, my big question was the ownership issue. Can we transfer ownership? How's that going to be looked at? Is there a waiting period? Well, yes, we can, 90 days after the ownership's transferred, because they had lived in it so long. So that worked. We were able to actually, save the house. And that's a dramatic end. Now, I will point out that I prefer, and I think Steve Purdy would agree, and anybody in this room, it's always better to plan than react. I mean, is that pretty fair to say? Well, I deal with a lot of react in this, where if someone had looked at things a little while before, not necessarily one of these cases, But I've got plenty where I couldn't do it because they had taken actions that blockaded me. Other liens on the property that could have been taken care of with the reverse. Now I can't because there's not enough equity. I've heard before, I wish I'd known about this a year or two ago. So my point up here is that I'm an information resource first. Whether or not it turns into a reverse mortgage, yeah, it'd be great if it works for them. I just had a conversation with a gentleman the other day where I'm recommending he don't do it because he's got better alternatives right now than this. But this is always there. I mean, as long as he's past 62 and owns the house, we got it. In fact, I'm going to have a conversation with Doris after the meeting because I got a call yesterday from Lynchburg from a referral in Roanoke that it's got a twist in it that involves Medicaid and elder law. And I'm not sure, it's beyond what I've dealt with already with Medicaid. So, point being, here's a great example of planning versus reacting. With a reverse mortgage, you can't do a reverse mortgage. Let's say you're a single, how much time? That was 10 minutes? I didn't think I could do 10 minutes. Okay. Well, if you want to know about planning, ask me.